Hello everyone, I am Stephen Drew from the Architecture Social, and we are live here. It's a Friday, it's the end of the week, we've all had a long week, but relax now and join me with a fantastic guest who I've actually met this week. Now we can see each other online, but we originally spoke on Instagram. Charlie Edmonds from FAF, I love saying FAF, here we go, we'll get my bell, bit of FAF, and the FAF is let's go for it, the Future Architects Front. And as I was saying before this, Charlie, you bulldozed onto Instagram. I was like, what is all this FAF about? So do you want to say hello to everyone and tell us about the FAF?
Yeah. So, yeah, FAF was, it was one of those things where you sort of reverse engineer the acronym you want in a way. Like we were sort of looking at a few, and then FAF, I was just like, oh, I love it. And then it was kind of a bit of a cheeky sort of poke at RIBA, because of course RIBA have their own future architects, and so we were a bit like, well, what if we were to take that and make it ours? It was a little bit of a funny acronym, little bit of a sort of like cheeky sort of taking your own term and using it for ourselves kind of approach.
I love it. I think cheeky is definitely a good... Is it cinnamon? It's definitely... Am I inventing words here? Cinnamon? So, FAF, right? Okay,
Yeah.
So let's talk about Future Architects Front. So my first perception was, you guys are loud and proud and you've got something to say. So you come on,
Yeah.
You were calling me out, you were calling Reba out, you're calling everyone for conversation. But that's
Yeah.
the nice thing, because... So what is... This, for anyone that hasn't seen what all the FAF is about on Instagram. So the Future Architects Front, you have an open letter addressed to Reba. And do you want to tell everyone about the open letter and what is FAF about?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, we are sort of responding to a condition in the architecture profession that I think almost everyone is aware of, almost everyone has experienced to some extent, and is sort of like part of the culture in a way. And so, of course, we're talking about things like exploitation in practice, we're talking about abusive work environments, and sort of the numerous sort of systemic faults that we see in architecture profession and education at the moment. So we were sort of looking at how a lot of these problems have been exacerbated by the pandemic. The thing that really sort of like, I suppose, pushed me in to start doing things was the article, the information released by the Architects Union, UVW SAW, that found that during the pandemic, a number of practices had, sort of claimed like furlough payments from the government, and then they'd kept their employees working full time despite that. They'd sort of been spying on employees through their webcams, and
Really?
just sort of like really like cartoon villain levels of like unethical behavior. And so, that combined with our own sort of experiences of being graduates and students in this current sort of architectural system we have right now basically led us to this point where we wanted to sort of put together a sort of little body of research that just kind of like summed up how a lot of architectural assistants and junior practitioners are feeling right now. So we first conducted a survey which received 166 responses, and we looked at questions like sort of have you ever worked unpaid overtime, which was let's see here, 88% have worked unpaid overtime. We looked at, do you feel supported by RIBA? 96% said no, we don't feel supported by RIBA. Ooh. And in addition to these sort of like data gathering questions, we also collected individual experiences of practice. So we also got 120 sort of written experiences from architectural assistants about things that had happened to them while working and studying architecture. And altogether, it painted a very sort of damning portrait of the current state of things. And so then we decided to write the open letter as a way of sort of bringing all of that information and feedback we got in the survey, sort of trying to represent all of those voices in one open letter calling for sort of large-scale systemic change. And that sort of took the form of 5 demands, which were to end unpaid overtime in RIBA chartered practices, provide effective oversight on the architectural assistant role, for there to be greater transparency in RIBA's budget and spending decisions, to establish a more representative governing body, and accountability for exploitative work environments. So that was a sort of big overview of, I suppose, the last 2 months of work from sort of beginning to now. And now we're at the point where we have over 600 signatures on the letter. So, you know, it's been rolling along very fast.
Yeah, and I signed it. And at first, I remember, because when we were booking in the podcast, was like, right, I've got to read this, but I was like, if I don't agree with it, we'll do the podcast. I'm not going to sign it just to sign it. But I do think that actually a lot of what's in there is valuable points of view, and the stuff you raise is factual, because these are people that have offered their experiences. I highly doubt anyone's having a giggle answering your survey as a fake part 2. It sounds like people are going to be doing this from a place of experience. And I think that what's interesting, when I was a part 2, I had the EPR architects, they were really good to me. What the thing is, though, I did work experience at another architectural practice, which I'm not going to name. They're not on my LinkedIn profile. And I had the opposite experience of EPR architects who were good employers. And I had a culture of getting work out for a deadline, where I was working long hours, and it was my birthday on a Friday. And when I was leaving at like 6:30 on the Friday, or 7, the practice owner was like, can you work tomorrow on the weekend? And I said, well, I'm going out for my birthday tonight, so probably can't. And he was like, well, it was my wife's birthday, and I was here the other week or two. And he actually said that to me, and I remember thinking,
that's so convoluted.
I was like, this is your architectural practice, not mine.
Right.
And I'm not married to you.
Yeah.
But it was my birthday, and I remember thinking, wow. And so I've had the polar opposite. So EPR Architects, AJ100 company, there was a culture where there was very little, and still is to this day, very little working late, and it would happen once in a blue moon, and they were generally good about it. I remember I worked one day late on they asked me if I would volunteer to go on the weekend, and then they give me, because I did, they give me the Monday off. Do you know what I mean? Because they had a deadline, and I felt that was fine because they approached me well in advance. They asked me, and they kind of done it the right way. Whereas this other architectural practice that I went for 2 weeks work experience.
2 weeks.
And and there was another scenario in it because the individual was really under pressure with a deadline, and I sympathize for that. But there was one example, right, Charlie, and you think it's interesting, when I was there, he was looming over my computer screen. So you know how this feels already.
Yeah. Kind of like holding like the hand that's moving the mouse.
And so I was moving on the screen, and then whenever I do something that was going wrong, he'd be like, no, what are you doing? And then I was like petrified, like,
you're just like, what? Do you do it?
Yeah, I felt like, but of course, it was like that thing of like, I felt privileged to be there, but then I was embarrassed I wasn't doing it right, and it was this weird like scenario. So you're right, I've seen two sides of it. What I would say, and this, I would love to get your thoughts on this, is because I think a lot of practices are doing it the right way, but there's unfortunately companies which, how do I say it, maybe aren't embracing the modern way of doing things, and there's like that archaic well, I suffered, so you should. Gordon Ramsay throw
kind of like the cycle
frying
of
pan.
abuse mentality.
Yeah, it's like, I'm trying to make you the best kind of architect you should be. You know, like Gordon Ramsay, he's
Right.
yeah, we said we were swearing. Gordon Ramsay's like, you fucking asshole, you this and that, and
Like,
then he throws a pan.
Yeah,
but people are like,
putting bread on either side of your head and calling you an idiot sandwich, that kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, it's like it almost sounds funny until you realize it's a real person that's in the middle of the idiot sandwich, and how hurtful is that? So, I mean, what's your opinion on this? So, when you wrote this, and it was towards RIBA, one of the questions I have is, it makes sense why you're challenging a conversation with RIBA. What's your thoughts about an open letter to architectural practices as well, or did you write this to RIBA to kind of champion the issue on behalf of the architecture industry? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, yes. The reason that we decided to direct it towards RIBA was because there's a sort of a few reasons. So one is that, you know, one of the people that inspired us to do this was UVW Saw, the Architects Union. And,
Great.
You know, from our point of view, they're already doing a great job in terms of unionizing workers to sort of campaign for better treatment in practice. So from our point of view, they are already doing that sort of work, and, you know, they're doing a great job at it. So that was part of it. The other part is that at the end of the day, I think something that we, especially in architecture, forget is that at the end of the day, these practices, regardless of how austere their sort of reputation is, regardless of how respected they are in the community, they are just businesses. And at the end of the day, regardless of what they say about their sort of artistic vision and, you know, creative drive, that kind of thing, at the end of the day, their first priority is to make money, because that's how a business works. If your first priority is not to make money, you usually go out of business. And so basically what we're sort of seeing, I think, is kind of the inherent problem with that system, which is where we've seen architects sort of progressively over the years devalue themselves in a sort of competitive way of trying to get more work. So you undercut each other to the point where today the profession is just outrageously undervalued. And so basically what we're thinking is, like, practices are always going to make these financially rooted decisions, and there's not so much that we can do about that, you know, without creating a new economic system for us to operate within, which is a very, very big challenge. So what we thought was, well, okay, how do you sort of push back against a company's drive to make money at whatever cost? Well, you create regulations. You create sort of standards of practice that everyone has to follow. And who is sort of the leading voice on that? It's RIBA. So essentially, the reason we sort of looked to RIBA is because they are the ones that sort of set the standard of how architecture practices should organize and should be run. So though they do not have the sort of direct power to influence practices that maybe some think they do, they still have a lot of influence, and they still have a very important role in that architectural ecosystem. So that was sort of the primary motivation in addressing this to them from our side.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And look, RIBA, I mean, it is the Royal Institute of British Architects, so quite
they've been
rightly,
around
as
a while.
you say, it's like, come on, RIBA, you got to get your weight on your opinion on this.
Earn that fancy title.
Royal. I agree. I think I do think they're trying. It's because there's such a large organization. It'd be really interesting to see. I think the open letter, right? And so for anyone that hasn't checked it out already, you can find that out on. I'm looking here. You've got your link tree, haven't you? So you can go on the Instagram. It's all there. You can find the open letter. We'll put it on the Architecture Social somewhere quite clearly as well. I'll post it after this. So I think you didn't you, Charlie? You posted it as well.
Yep.
I will. Oh, what I'll do is in this podcast, we'll put the link to the open letter there as well.
Okay, great.
Okay,
so in the show notes or something. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that. But I just want to go back to, so we've addressed RIBA. What I would love to do as well is that I'm going to add a little bit of a spin to this. This is kind of my piece as well, is that I think it's great that we're discussing this with RIBA, but I'd like to almost like get this open letter, and I think we need to make architectural practices aware of it. So here's my thoughts on this, right? So you've hit the nail on the head. There's a few factors that let's just focus even on working long hours right now.
Okay,
you're totally right that if the fees on a job are low, basically I hate to use the analogy, but shit runs downhill, and that's why sometimes what happens is a low fee is almost called a suicide bid, and you're right, where basically it means maybe less people are on the team, which means that the people currently on the team then have more responsibility. They have to work longer hours, and generally what happens is that those people are quite rightly unhappy. Now there's two parts of the problem, is that there's one or two famous architectural practices I'm thinking of, which okay, have a guess online, have a little think, where there's a culture known for long hours. Part of the problem, though, is that if an architect leaves for working long hours at a prestigious architectural practice, there's someone that's going to clambering for that job. And so I think a lot of what you're talking about, what is good is that with the FAF, and what you're saying, Charlie, is that we've got to take a bit of responsibility to talk about it, but you've got to stick by it as well. And one of the problems will happen is if as an industry, we, like you say, the fees need to go high. We need to get our own value, our own self-worth, both as a business and as a professional. And what I like about this is, you shouldn't be working long hours. I mean, that's one of the reasons why one of the incentives of moving away from directly in architecture is that I didn't want to work long hours. But where I'm going with this, so just to bring it back online, is that before I go ranting, because this is my favorite subject to rant on, is long hours in architecture and all stuff. What businesses need to learn is that if you don't look after staff, they leave, right? And it's expensive, Charlie, to get a recruitment consultant in. If you say now, right, you're running Charlie Architecture Practice, and we're going to be in a parallel universe. Okay.
I design only Pizza Hut exteriors. You know the 90s ones with the big hat on top of the building. I used to love those.
Okay, so you got your Pizza Huts, you're making a lot of money, and you've got 100 people, and you're the opposite of what you're talking about, and you're saying, Steve, these Pizza Huts driving me down on the costs. I've got bills to pay. I've got my Lamborghini. I'm keeping 100 people in the job. And and what happens is that I'm saying we're mates, and I'm like, Charlie, you're working people too hard, you mate, and then you go, whatever, Steve. Just I got to do this next Pizza Express or whatever, and then after that, I'll look at it. I'll look at it after the deadline. What happens is then people start leaving Charlie's Architects, and you go, Steve, everyone's leaving, and they say, I bloody told you so, mate, because you're driving everyone crazy. And then you go, well, I need to find new people now. So already the reputation of Charlie's Pizza Enterprise is awful because you work people like a dog. But what's interesting is that I then go, sure, Charlie, I'll recruit for you. And you go, cool, how much is that? And I'll go, it's probably between 15 to 20% of someone's base salary. And so then at that point you're going, Jesus Christ, Steve, how is it so expensive? And this is what I'm trying to get at, is recruitment is expensive. And so actually, there's a good example that you might try. There was like a head of well-being at Stride Treadlown. I hope I said the company's name right. Stride Treadlown. Sorry, that's a bit of a tongue twister. And she basically, I saw a presentation by her and it was amazing. So she was like head of well-being. They never had that role before. They never heard of it. And she went into a meeting with the board of directors, right? And was like, okay, I'm going to go and we're gonna make sure that people don't work X amount of hours over. Everyone's gonna have on like a Friday afternoon a bit of time to do their own research. And that first reaction is from the board of directors. They were like, "Are you crazy? What the heck? We're already struggling as it is." But what was interesting is she then put in place this amazing supportive structure. And what happened is, Charlie, that suddenly people stopped taking sick days. The sickness in the practice went down huge. People were happy then to go to work. And because it wasn't expected, when there was overtime, they went, "Do you know what, Charlie? We'll do the Pizza Express. I'll do it with you. We'll do the late nights. We'll do it." And then suddenly people wanted to go to work, and it was their choice how much they worked, and it wasn't expected. And it suddenly then became a really fantastic place to work. And that's where I think that what's amazing and what you're doing is calling out an issue. I think, though, that maybe one of the ways that we can get there is almost educating architectural practices at the cost savings of actually treating people a little bit more, in some cases, more human. I mean, there's some good practices doing it, but maybe to the practices which I've still got that old culture, maybe that's one way of doing it. I mean, what's your thoughts on my long tirades?
I think it's sort of, I think the experience you had is representative of like a larger issue with anyone who is sort of campaigning for any kind of equity, which is that the thing you're campaigning for is going to benefit everyone in the long term. Even the people at the top will benefit from greater equity in the long term for exactly the reasons that you just sort of went into. Like, even though it appears to be a threat, it appears to be a cost, it is better for everyone in the long term. I think the problem that you face with any campaign for equity is that the people who have the most influence, the most systemic influence, and who are going to be making the decisions which sort of create the change that you want to see or do not create the change that you want to see, you know, it's part of this larger problem that is the people in power got there through the way things are and through the status quo. So any discussion about changing the status quo or changing the way that things are, even if it would be a net benefit to everyone, still appears to be a threat and still appears to be, you know, challenging that person's place in the world. So and the problem with, like, you know, I really would love to believe that you could just go to Patrick Schumacher and be like, "Look, Patrick, treat your workers better, and like it'll be better for you in the long run." But I really don't think that Patrick Schumacher is going to sit down and listen to me. I don't think Patrick Schumacher is going to sit down and listen to anyone. I think the problem with the people who are sort of like right at the top of these positions is that they, and this perhaps is where maybe I'm a little too cynical, is that I think that they will only respond to overwhelming numbers of people trying to create change. I don't know if you can sort of gently educate them into a better way of working. So
you can chip away, but what I like as well is your attitude where you came in like a bull in the china shop. Because sometimes it's like you gotta like, it's like that's why I got the horn a bit. It's like it's so jarring in a conversation that it almost wakes sometimes people up in the room. And you're right, actually going slowly about these issues. is going to take time, and I think that there's nothing wrong here in doing it in a way that grabs people's attention. But what I like is that even though you're talking to me, you're open to a discussion with RIBA. You're open. The important thing is conversation about this issue, and not everyone needs to agree on everything. But what they do is we all agree that there is an issue that I think in architecture there has been a culture of long hours, low pay. I mean, it is what people. It's funny that at first you got two people. So anyone that hasn't worked in architecture will go, "Oh, you're an architect. You're rich, aren't you?" And then anyone, and then anyone in the industry is just like, it's tough. And of course, there's some beautiful things to it. It's not all doom and gloom. I mean, the idea that you can build a building or a school right now or a hospital and improve people's life. There's a reason why we all get into it. But you're right. Wouldn't it just be nice if it wasn't such pain for some people? And so that's why I feel like this offers a lot of value. So let's go over them more. So I'm curious. So we got number one, which was end unpaid overtime in all RIBA chartered practices. Okay, well that makes sense because RIBA, if you're a RIBA chartered practice, they in theory could influence that, right?
Yeah, so, if you're a chartered practice, you have to agree to a set of conditions laid out by RIBA. So, for example, one of them that already exists is the fact that if you're a RIBA chartered practice, you should be paying people the living wage as opposed to the minimum wage. I've read a lot of experiences that is not always the case, but that is in the sort of contract that you sign to become a RIBA chartered practice. So there is precedent for introducing these kind of regulations for chartered practices.
Yeah, I think, well, look, just somewhat my position on this, I'm seeing a few things, is that I do not think anyone who is a part one or part two, if someone offers you an unpaid role, if it's for a short period of time, maybe have a think about what skills you could learn. But truthfully, I would do the unpaid role. And as soon as I'm there, I'd be looking for a paid role. Probably. I'd be looking for a paid role using Google in the office, looking for a paid role. And don't ever let anyone tell you that you have to work unpaid, right? You really don't. So the first thing you should do is be looking for a paid job. And the other thing is, from a business perspective, the last person that I'd want to work on my project is unpaid, because say now, let's use Charlie's architect's theory, right? And you're not paying me. Say now I bodged up the pizza thing. You're like, Steve, what you doing? And I'm like, you haven't paid me. What liability do I have?
What onus do I have to?
I owe you nothing. Precisely. So I go, do you know what, Charlie? You can do it your bloody self then. And so I think that's where I think actually, anyone that's saying they will offer an unpaid role to someone it's a poor business decision.
Well, I mean, it is technically illegal in the UK to offer an unpaid position. So I mean that's why we're sort of specifically looking at unpaid overtime, where you are getting a salary, but you. So something that was really fascinating to me from the experiences that we collected was certain people had tallied up their hours of unpaid overtime, and what they figured out was that if you work your salary out per hour, a lot of architectural assistants are working below minimum wage. So
fair enough.
You know, it is like when you talk about, like, you know, sort of like a good practice that only asks people to work, you know, unpaid overtime occasionally, like, maybe that wouldn't make that big of a difference to your hourly salary. But some practices are really like taking it to the point where your hourly salary is below minimum wage.
I agree with you there. Sorry, I must admit, maybe it's because my Friday brain was dropping off, and I kind of thought I was unpaid jobs. But you're right, unpaid overtime.
That is still a problem, to be fair. But that is a problem that RIBA have to some extent addressed, because in the agreement you have to sign to become a RIBA charter practice, you have to agree to pay anyone who works for you, whether they're a student, whether they're a professional, whatever. So to be fair to RIBA, they have already sort of cut. Well, to be a little bit fair to RIBA, they put it in the contract. They're not very good at enforcing it, but it's in the contract. So they haven't done nothing on that front, and I'll give them that.
See, FAF, you are nice. You know, you give RIBA a little brownie point there.
I will say they haven't done nothing.
No, fair. Look, I think end unpaid overtime in all RIBA chartered practices, it's a definitely good conversation. And the bit that I would like to throw in is that I think it should be end expected unpaid overtime. And I think expected is a really interesting word, because what I think is it should be more power. If I'm working for you, it's my choice, and you shouldn't. But where's interesting, and you've got all the stories in here as well, is the play on that the fact that most people in an architectural practice, I feel like, and a lot of people, you almost need to have the confidence to realize that you don't have to do it, but it's almost made to feel like you're expected to do it. I can totally see it happening where you're part of a team, everyone's working, because they've got this in the video game industry as well, and it's a big problem called crunch, and you know, with Cyberpunk, which came out, it was all over the news, and it's that implied, you know, it's that implied thing, right, of like, well, Charlie, but I'm working, and John's working, and Dave's working, so why are you gonna, because if you don't work, you can go, Charlie, but then you're putting the rest of us in a pinch. And
and it's an interesting example of, you know, it's almost like reverse solidarity, where traditionally when you talk about worker solidarity, you're talking about workers coming together to campaign for better rights, but it's almost been flipped on its head in a lot of companies, where now the pressure is, well, I'm working for free, why aren't you working for free? And it's such a bizarre like parody of what, you know, solidarity is supposed to be amongst employees.
Totally. I mean, I've got an example with it. So in architectural recruitment, for instance, okay, so my fees get pushed down as well, and so I've got some. I've got a few architectural practices which work with me on recruitment, and so the way architectural practice recruitment works is that you get a percentage base. So if I introduce you to, let's say, a practice like EPR Architects where I work, they will pay me X percentage of your annual salary, right, for the introduction. That doesn't come out of your salary or anything, that's just the fee. So the introduction is like a few £1,000s or whatever. Sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of man hours onto it. But I get the same thing, right, where some architectural practices will hammer my fees down, and they go, well, we pay low fees, so you should as well. And then the bit I've learned now is that I always say, well, look, Charlie, I can work at a lower fee for you, but it's exactly like the way you do architecture. So what are we cutting out of the process here? Okay, I can't meet the candidates anymore because I'm not being paid to do that. I can't thoroughly check their background. I can't sit down and get their true meanings because the fees cut, so I'm just whirling CVs over. And what's interesting then is that suddenly companies then realize that they want the service of the higher fee. But what I've learned is now I stay stronger to my views on my worth, what my time is, not working 3 hours. And I think to go to your point there, you hit the nail on the head. It's this whole thing of working for free, getting paid low fees, and committing to things where you're put under pressure, and then that kind of has a negative knock-on effect. So I felt it as well. So the other thing, let's talk about some of the other points that you've got here. So this one is going to be an interesting, this is a definitely interesting point. Provide effective oversight on the architectural assistant role. Holy moly, the Pandora's box of the architectural assistant. I'm technically architectural assistant. Now, first of all, and this is my opinion before you even go into it, it's so awkward, isn't it, sometimes when you say architectural assistant, because it sounds like I'm literally sharpening pencils for a bloody architect.
Right. It sounds like you're carrying the drawings.
But I studied it for 5 years, and I worked in the industry for 3 years, and I'm an architectural assistant. So can you, in your words, run through your thoughts on this, why you put this in the open letter as well?
So the the second demand about the oversight for the architectural assistant role, in a lot of ways, that is what kicked this all off for me personally. Was, you know, I graduated myself. I finished my master's degree last year, and like many people, you know, I'm then in this sort of pandemic job search world, and which is a wonderful place to be.
No,
and
it definitely isn't.
What I kept seeing was these ads for, and you know, working in recruitment, I'm sure you know about this, part 2 with 2, 3, whatever years of experience. And, you know, as a graduate, you're kind of sitting there thinking, what did I do all of this education and part 1 for? Like, if now I've done 2 degrees, I've paid 45 grand to universities, and you're telling me I'm not qualified, that something's not working. And so, you know, the problem, you know, as we see it, is that the role is ambiguous about what it's supposed to be. And when there's ambiguity in sort of, particularly in some kind of like business relationship, the person who benefits from the ambiguity is the person in power, because they can take advantage of the ambiguity. So, and the ambiguity I'm talking about is that RIBA themselves define an architectural assistant as a student working in practice to gain experience. So It's very clearly defined from the outset as part of your education, right? You do it to learn, you do it to move towards qualifying as an architect. It's not supposed to be a position where you purely provide value to your employer. The idea is that it's sort of like a mutually beneficial relationship, but the way it's being put into practice by architectural practices is this completely one-sided approach of, we want you to have experience, we want you to give us the maximum amount of value that we can squeeze out of you, and our responsibilities for educating you, looking at your PEDR sheets, all of that all comes sort of as secondary, tertiary priorities. So the problem is that the role is just simply not working in the way that it was intended to work, and RIBA seems to just be totally nonplussed about it. They seem very happy for it to continue in this kind of dysfunctional manner that it's already in. And, you know, the other issue is that it also gives, like I said, ambiguity benefits the person in power. It gives practices the opportunity to hire people with the same experience as an architect, but because they're coming into these entry-level positions, they can pay them less. So it's, you know, and that's not something that all practices do. So, you know, some practices will pay by experience, but it's something that can happen. And it's the pathway to qualification, the architectural assistant role, it is currently just very dysfunctional. There's a lot of opportunity for exploitation in that pathway, and it just needs some sort of reassessment. It needs some kind of work done to make it functional.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I mean, I'm like I said, so I'm an architectural assistant, and so what's interesting, what was the actual quote you mentioned? It was that it's to someone in pursuit of becoming an architect. Well,
yeah, the definition is a student employed by practice.
Okay, I am the worst architectural assistant in the world then, because I haven't been in architecture for ages. And do you know what? That really resonated with me personally, because there's a few things going on here where actually you're right. I think that what's interesting is that salaries normally jump up the moment someone gets qualified. And if you're an architectural assistant which has industry experience, I would agree with you that they're most likely on a lesser salary than their architect's counterpart who knows just as much. So that is one of the problems. And the other thing that I find is I mean, this isn't necessarily. This is more of a bigger issue with education, but you're right. The actual cost of now getting a degree and diploma, this kind of puts more pressure on the problem. And I remember reading, I think it what's his name years ago? There was a RIBA president. Was it Stephen Hall? I want to say Stephen Hall.
All of the names of every RIBA president sounds exactly the same to me. It's always like
really
Alan Cumbersome. Like it's like they all just blend into one 50-year-old white man in my head.
Okay. Yeah, well, so this Stephen guy, right?
Uh-huh.
He basically, what did he say? He said something like he was looking at changing the RIBA system, right? And that hasn't changed. You're right. I remember at the time he was like, well, I'm thinking that a part 2, if they've done a few years in industry, they can then become an architect, or there's a pathway to it. And I was like, I remember reading it thinking, brilliant, Charlie, this is how I do it without doing my part 3, because I can just say, well, technically I've been in the industry, and that hasn't changed. No. So we've basically got this older model, right? Where you need your 3 years and your part 1. First year's a bit of a giggle. You're kind of hungover and never go in the class. Second year gets a bit more serious. Third year, now what's interesting is though, an architecture degree and diploma, I thought it was personally really, the skills you learn are shit hot, right? There's no doubt that presenting work and crits and being destroyed and all that stuff can set you up for these really good skills in life. And like us now, we're on a podcast, we're doing all this stuff because you learn all these amazing skills. The issue is though, the year above me, I remember they were paying £1,500 per year. I got really upset. You're going to be jealous of me, though, because I paid £3,000 a year. You paid how much? God knows how much. How much you paid?
$9,000 a year. Tuition fees. Let alone like rent, accommodation. It's
Carlsbergs,
etc. Yeah. So like, it just becomes something that you just kind of. A lot of people who went to university in the 9K plus years, I think the majority have just acknowledged that they will just never pay it back, because it does get I don't know if you know this, but it does get written off when you are 50. I think by that age, if you haven't paid it off yet, they're just like, wipe the slate clean. So to me, I'm just like, well, never going to pay it off, so might as well borrow as much as I can.
Well, I mean, I don't. The problem is that it's suddenly an expensive career for the salary that you're going to get paid, and then the problem is that it goes back to, then you've got to really enjoy the job. It's got to be it's like a life choice architecture, because you've got to really want to enjoy it. And then it kind of goes back to the other issues where you raised before. It gets really hard to enjoy it if you're working in a culture where you're working long hours and low pay. And so, do you get what I mean? So there's this world of pain that you're building up, Charlie, that you discover. It's like you pay a lot and then you work hard, and so there's so many facets going on which kind of build up to this. But at the same time, I'm like you. I think that you can't just go, oh, well, this is a bigger problem than me, and we don't set the tuition fees. We've all got to look at it and slowly chip away at making places more pleasant for people to work. I think that's the big thing. And the architectural assistant loophole, you're right, because I am stuck now. Okay, so let's pretend I give up recruitment and I want to go back to architectural practice. I am in a world of pain, because suddenly my salary and my worth goes back down to 28 to 30 grand.
28 is the average right now,
So I'm screwed.
That's in
on
London,
my
by the way.
mortgage.
Not anywhere else. 28 if you're in London. Anywhere else, it'll be lower than that.
I know a practice will do 32 grand.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, they exist, but like the on the current RIBA pay scale, 28 in London is the average, I think.
It's too low, really. It should be more. It should be 30. Like, I'm just saying, like, my opinion, at least.
Yeah, no,
well, it should be as high as possible. You're right. I mean, if the fees,
I totally agree.
Yeah, I think it's well, okay, I can say this factually. How about this, Charlie? So I was on £30,000 as a part two in 2012.
9 years
So
later.
that's what you had 9 years ago. That's what I was on.
So that's not even adjusting for inflation. So that's
No,
less,
exactly.
actually. That's actually getting paid less now than 9 years ago.
Yeah, and there you go. And I can say that because that was a fact. And I felt at the time that EPR architects were extremely generous with the salary, and they are quite good with salaries.
Yeah.
But I remember I was paid a lot more than some of my mates.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no,
and that's embarrassing, isn't it?
There's so many horror stories. Like, you know, if you look through the experiences in the letter, you know, I think it was like 17,000 was something I saw for like a part one, 16,500, like really, really like as low as you can sort of get, to be honest. Yeah, and the other interesting loophole, which I didn't know about before reading through all of those experiences in the letter, was that a lot of practices use freelance positions to basically pay people below minimum wage. So
how does that work? I don't see, because I deal with, in terms of recruitment, I've had contractors contracting at companies, and they actually did get decent money. But so this freelance thing you want, is this more you've heard people that are architectural assistants which are being freelancers?
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, so architectural assistants will sometimes be employed as freelancers, which means that you can, you know, pay them a sort of quote unquote hourly rate, but then what tends to happen is that the architectural assistants have none of the freedom that independent contractors usually have, because they're still working full-time in a lot of these cases. They're still having to work the same hours as the practice. So essentially, in effect, they are regular employees. Legally, they're freelancers who are doing like their own unpaid overtime, but the effect of that is that you essentially have a full-time employee that you can pay less than minimum wage, and that's something that we heard multiple times in the experiences in the open letter.
That's pretty bad. It reminds me of the Uber scenario. Do you remember when they
it's exactly the same? Yeah,
full-time employees, but basically
it's exactly the same.
We don't make it medical.
It's taking advantage of, you know, the gig economy, basically, and it's taking advantage of people's desperation to work. So it is part of like a larger problem of like 0-hour contracts and freelance work and that kind of thing. But it's something that in the conversation of, you know, unpaid overtime and things like that, the issue of like freelancers and independent contractors, that's actually something I hadn't heard brought up before in discussions within architecture about this, and yet it was something that came up a few times in the experiences in the open letter.
It's interesting because I'm lucky that some of the clients I have in terms of recruitment, they're kind of ethical employers, and but the idea of that happening, I've not heard of it myself, but bizarrely, I don't disbelieve you. But actually, these companies, if you're a freelance, if you've been asked to do this, or you should talk about it. I think that the more, and it reminds me years ago, right, Charlie? There was this website called ArchLeaks. You would have absolutely.
I think I've heard of this. It, right? Yeah.
You would have loved. This is right up your street.
Yeah. And
so it was like ArchLeaks.com, and you had people on there that which would just be like, I work at XYZ, my boss did this and that, and you know, and it was kind of like, it was like the interesting taboo website. It's like, have you been on ArchLeaks? And you Google your architecture practice and see if someone popped up there. And on one hand, the catch-22 is when something's anonymous, it's harder to take it as serious because you don't know if the truth is there or not. But at the same time, it's really hard to ask someone to unanonymize themselves because then it's like the whole Me Too thing. I mean, look, Marilyn Manson's, you know, this week, right, with the whole everyone's coming out and saying how awful a person it is, and I was shocked because I listened to Marilyn Manson's music, and now I'm like, oh my, but it's basically like, good, he's been called out. What I'm saying is, we need to kind of call out these practices which are kind of taking the piss, excuse my language, with taking the piss with this loophole, because I think that one of the ways that will solve this is if we should promote architectural practices who are looking after their staff, leading from the front, inclusive environment, giving time off, going above and beyond. These practices should be celebrated. And I wonder, we could do an element of talking about practices which are maybe not as ethical, like calling out for things. But I wonder whether one real powerful way of getting employees to change their ways would be to champion the amazing architectural practices. I'll tell you what, speaking on the spot, I'll do something with you. Okay. We could do a little thing on the Architecture Social where if we find out amazing architectural practices which look after their staff, I will put them on the website. I will put all the contact details there. We can then rally up really good. All the architectural students of the world can look and see, like, holy moly, this company is amazing. Yeah. They'll get loads of applicants, and therefore, maybe in a business way, we can start conditioning employers to think, oh shit, I want to be on Steve's website, or we want to be on Architecture Social and get Charlie's recommendation as a good employer, because then suddenly they'll get loads of good people going. Maybe that's an idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that is a lot more powerful today than it was, even like 10 years ago is how the sort of mechanisms that we can use to create sort of grassroots movements like you just discussed. Something that's really been kind of crazy to wrap my head around in this whole process is that from the first survey we released about this to this point of getting, what are we on right now? Like 670 signatures or something. I basically haven't left this house. Like I've done half of this in sweatpants, like on a phone. Do you know what I mean? Like it's there are despite all of the problems with social media, there is so much potential through it to facilitate this kind of like grassroots campaigning, this sort of like collective voice of people who traditionally do not get to speak, sort of put their head above the parapet and say something. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in these sort of systems. Like, think about this, even 10 years ago, I would probably be like maybe emailing the open letter around to people. Maybe I'd be putting it up on the wall of my studio, that kind of thing. Do you think I would have been able to get a response from RIBA in 4 days of doing that? No. But with Instagram, we had RIBA like reach out to us and be like, hi, we've read the letter, we'll be in touch. Within 4 days of like getting people to sign it. So these tools are really, there's so much potential in them for this kind of organizing. And I think there's definitely a lot of potential in terms of like you said, sort of boosting the profile of people who are sort of practicing in a very progressive and ethical way. I think there's a lot of potential for that. And I really just hope that this kind of collective will and collective ability to influence something leads to a lot more kind of awareness and a lot more willingness to engage with the sort of current systems that we work within. Because, one of the huge problems with like the last RIBA presidential election, for example, was the turnout was abysmal. Like, so few people voted for the new president, and especially so few like student members. And it's just because we feel powerless in the system, so it's like, oh, what's the point of voting? It's not going to change anything anyway. So these kind of like organizational structures that kind of break down how things work and tell people you can influence the very highest levels of the organizations that you participate in if you work with other people. I really hope that could lead to this kind of larger change in the current of the profession in like an ideal world, in an ideal future.
Well, I mean, I'll be really honest with you. It's like it can go two ways, right? Like we're chatting here now, and it depends on it's got to be an important issue. And what the one thing you got to be careful with social media is you're right. It's about a cause, and it's about it's the community which gets behind the open letter, which will drive it, right? But if it's suddenly the flavor of the week, and this is the thing of like with Instagram, it's like, oh, FAF's a bit of fun this week, and but people have got to really get behind the message, and I think they are. And what I will say to you is, rather than like, hey, thanks Charlie, you've been this week's podcast and he'll go live next week and then me and you never speak again. What I would love to do is, I seriously think it's a great idea, and what I quite like about with the Architecture Social, and take it in a nice way with the FAF, right? I felt there was no space for online people to have real conversations, or I felt, because I was on furlough last year, and the idea of being a part one or part two during this time is a bit of a shitty scenario. And what was nice is that building originally it was a bit of a resource for hopefully giving a bit of support to people and kind of empowering people to go on with their search. And since then it's kind of become a community, and one of the things I'm really passionate about is championing people, our architecture practices, which I think are doing it the right way. So I'll do you a deal, and we'll get you. I want the Charlie, or we'll call it. Maybe we'll call it the FAF Award. Hear your thoughts on this, right? But if you give the FAF Award to the best architectural practice, I think that would be cool. And what I'll do now, I mean, you don't have to do it, but just saying, I invented the FAF Awards. So if it becomes as big as the medals and stuff, I want you to remember your old pal Steve here. I'll be like, we came up with a name, and you'll be like, well, whatever, Steve. But I think that's how you make change. And I do think it's important to recognize where people have gone wrong, but it's a bit like, when like an awful event happens, and I almost don't want to give the limelight to bad employers, because I'm just like, forget that. I'd rather just spend the energy on, like, for instance, good employers I know. EPR, I work there. I think they're very good. Hawkins Brown, they kind of got a cool culture there, and they've got amazing benefits, amazing rewards. And so my one of the Chris artists has actually joined working at a developer right now, where they're very liberal with you can work whatever hours you want, kind of beanbag culture, very inclusivity, and this is really, really important stuff. And we need to be talking about how to employ people properly, how to be inclusive. We need to talk about like we were saying earlier, people need to remember that if they are going to work unpaid overtime, it's their choice. They're not contractually bound, and we need to champion companies which like do it the right way. So one of the parts in the Architecture Social is like a directory that I'm trying to build up of architectural practices. But what we can do, and I'm serious, man, is that I'm happy in the directory to give emphasis to good employers. And I'll tell you what, I will not put someone on the directory. I'll take them. Oh, I feel like swearing here. Oh, whatever, we're swearing this. I'll take them fucking off the directory if they're an awful architectural practice, because I want to say blacklist here, but I am not okay with the idea of someone hiring people or treating people the wrong way. The good news is I think an awful lot of practices do it right, or their intentions are getting there. We just got to keep the conversation going. And I think that from my point of view of seeing recruitment from the sideline, I do think that there's actually a huge financial gain for companies to treat people a little bit better, because they'll stay longer, they'll be better staffed, they'll be more motivated, and the output will be better. So it's my thoughts on it. What do you think? Should we do the Charlie Awards? Should we call it the Charlie Awards or the FAF Awards?
Oh god, I would feel incredibly false, like pretending that, like, my opinion was like something worth giving an award from.
I think I see it a bit more tongue in cheek. Like the FAF Award is not, it's like, I tell you what, I went to a talk before the COVID where, there's, oh my gosh, what was the name of it? Negroni Talks. And so it was quite a controversial one where they were talking about what the value of awards are in architecture, and it's kind of like the award. And did you know there's an awards ceremony for awards ceremonies? So the awards of the awards, which is an absolute, it's an absolute circle jerk, really, isn't it? But basically, I do think, though, architectural practices which do good should be recognised, and I do think it would be a bit of fun, bit of faff, to because what's really interesting about speaking to you is you're very approachable, right? You're very open to communication. The first time you added me on Instagram, I was like, what world of pain is this? And I'm like, I gotta be careful with this. But actually, no, because you're a human being, and there's a really good agenda here, and I think there's a nice spirit with it as well, with the memes and. I'd be interested to see what you do. Are you interested in making it like? Are you interested? At what point is FAF to you reached its goals? Is it the FAF Award, or are you like, Stephen, that's a terrible idea? Or what is? Where do you see FAF going?
I think
right now it's about getting the open letter, right? But after that, where are we going?
Yeah. So. Yeah, originally it was very much just about the open letter. Well, so, I mean, I suppose it's kind of connected to, like, the reason for, like, making the group at all, because for half of the campaign, for the entire time we were gathering, we were doing the survey and things like that, there was, like, FAF has only existed for, like, 6 days. Like, this entire thing was, for the majority of the time, just led from, like, my Instagram account. And the reason I decided to, like, shift it away from, like, me as an individual was that, one, like, I had been working with, like, some, incredibly intelligent, competent people in terms of, like, developing the survey, writing the letter, that kind of thing. So I kind of wanted to, like, take my face off of it, because it was like a group effort. And the other thing was, I suppose it was kind of like this subconscious ambition for it to be more than what I had originally intended for it to be. Because originally I was like, in my head, I was like, do the survey, write the letter, send the letter, do something else, like, get back to, like, my life, whatever I'm doing. And I think the motivation for trying to turn it into, like, a kind of group, or a Instagram loves to use the word community. The reason for that was that I'm a little skeptical about the response we're going to get from RIBA, first of all. So I have a feeling that the response is going to be very... it's just going to be like them trying to placate us and being like, oh, yes, we are actively working on this, and we're doing lots of good things, and we won't tell you what it is, but we're going to say the right things. That's kind of what I'm expecting. Again, I'm probably maybe being a bit cynical, but that's what I'm expecting. And so in terms of the longevity of this, I think the reason why this because, there have been a lot of campaigns like this. Like, UVW Saw has done, like, really big campaigns like this. Articles going back years and years and years of talking about unpaid overtime in the profession. Like, we're not raising any of these topics for the first time. What I think there is a unique opportunity to take advantage of by a group like FAF is that things like UVW SAW, right? They're like a proper union, so they represent working people, and what we've seen is that the ambiguity of the architectural assistant position means that they're going to be less likely to join a union because are they workers? Are they students? We don't really know. We also don't really have a voice for students apart from like architecture societies and universities are great, and like they've done so much to like publicize the letter and get signatures for us. Like, so many societies have shared it and emailed it to people. But the problem with that is that, you know, you're only in a society like that for a couple of years and then you leave. So the ways that it can sort of work for people are limited by that time frame. So I think I was looking at something like FAF as an opportunity to represent the people in the precarious working situations, the people in the ambiguous space between student and worker, for students themselves, that kind of thing. And, you know, the thing I think people responded really well to with the open letter is that it wasn't just... we didn't start with the open letter, do you know what I mean? It wasn't just us being like, here's what we think is wrong. Nag, like, do this RIBA, do that RIBA. It was, first we did a survey, we put together like a lot of data, we did the research, and I think that's what people responded to the most in the letter, is that it wasn't just like off the cuff. It was based on hundreds of people's opinions and experiences, and so that is kind of, you know, if there's a life after the open letter, which I hope there will be, I hope it's almost like an opportunity for FAF to be kind of like a research group that studies the conditions of employment and studies the system of architecture as education, as business, and kind of produces like reports or data about what's working, what isn't working, what needs to change. And you know that, but like, you know, a lot of that is because, you know, a lot of my architecture background is in like research and writing and things like that. So that's kind of my momentum and my kind of idea of what could be done. But also, like, I just want other people to work on it as well. You know what I mean? Like, ideally in maybe a month or two, like, I would want me to be looking at it like maybe once a week, and it to just kind of be something that like a group of people who, you know, all are kind of committed to like improving equity in the profession are all kind of collaboratively working on. And then I don't know, for me it feels less like a vanity project, or like it feels less like my thing. It's like actually something that is kind of being collaboratively worked on for the benefit of the people who are in the most vulnerable positions in the profession right now.
Yeah, I think that do you know what? It resonates a lot with me. You've inspired me from this, and I'll give you, I mean, you can hold me accountable a little bit, but what I'm going to do is, no, seriously, because what I quite like is that the architecture social, and a little bit partly because of my working in the industry is important, but in terms of recruitment, I'm in that little world of employment. One of the goals of the architecture social is to bring practices closer to students and kind of almost remove some of the barriers in terms of recruitment. And I'm saying, like, to employers, you can sign up there and start hiring people straight away. But one of the things that I am going to do, and this has all come to the forefront from the FAF, seriously, is that I am going to champion on the social employers that I think do it right. And we will see and that'll be maybe my little way of doing my little bit of FAF or whatever, right? But maybe that will have a little bit of a positive change. Maybe not. I don't know, but we'll see together. I predict that could make a little bit of a ripple effect. But this is the point, is that's just me doing my little thing in my little world, and everyone as perspective into FAF, whether you've experienced an industry or whether you're sharing the open letter or you're discussing it or you're speaking to RIBA or you're speaking to your employer and talking about these things, that's what's going to make the difference. And actually, and this is the important thing to get, I think, is that just clicking a like, yeah, there's a little bit of a value in it, but everyone should discuss it. Do you agree with the 5 points? Do you disagree? It's really important to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to have the change. So it's really good that RIBA has acknowledged it. Great. Next step is discussing it. So RIBA, if you're listening, there you go. You got Charlie. He's quite accessible, and I think that one of the ways that would open this conversation up is that conversation with RIBA. So hopefully, as much as I enjoyed your meme of 300 Sparta and RIBA coming down from the mountain, I wonder, and I actually have a funny feeling that, because RIBA's a big company,
they're big.
RIBA Future Architects could be a way in, because they seem like a bit of a fun, responsive team, and they're active on Instagram, so I have no doubt they know what the FAF is about. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, RIBA Education follows us, so I'm sure they've seen it.
RIBA Future Architects. All right, we gotta do a little FAF meme at them and see what happens. Okay.
Yeah, it's really funny you said that, because I actually made one today, and I was like, this is too divisive.
Have we gone too much? Have you gone too up?
It was the moment where I looked at it and I was like, this is too much.
Right, send it to me on WhatsApp, and I'll tell you. I'll be like, Charlie, mate, you've gone a bit too far. You've got to build up to these things. I'm like, you're gonna lose them. We've got to win people over, mate.
I have to temper like my own personal style of humor, which is mean. Basically, like my humor is a little mean. Like,
mean's not going to go you anywhere. Then suddenly
I don't mean it in a bad way. I think it's actually part of a larger opinion, which is that if you are trying to negotiate with someone at a position of like far greater power to you, right? You can rib them a bit, you know? You can roast them a bit.
Yeah, you can.
That levels the playing field, right?
Yeah,
I know. I feel okay doing it. I feel okay doing it to RIBA, like big strong RIBA. I feel okay doing it to them. I think doing it to the future architects, I'd feel a bit bad, because I think they mean well. I think they're doing good things, and that their hearts are in the right place. It's the people I am completely unapologetic about being antagonistic towards are the people at the top.
I know who you are. Patrick got a bad time on our podcast in the earlier. But I tell you what, right? I think get ready for future architects, because imagine the way of change is that conversation going everywhere, and they are part of RIBA, and they're probably going to be a really good factor to have on your site, because it's such a big organization.
Yeah.
And what I would say, right, from what I've learned, is that I worked at, like, even EPR, right, is 200 people. The bigger the companies are, and like at McDonald's company where I work, it's all good intentions, but big companies, it takes a while for decisions, right? But the more and more people can influence these decisions, then you'll make a big difference. So RIBA Future Architects, let me look at the camera. RIBA Future Architects, all right. I'm gonna send a link to them on this, and we'll test them, because it's quite a thing. We'll see if they got to the hour and 13-minute mark.
Yeah, let's
do a word to see if they got. I'll say, what word did we say?
Pizza Hut roof.
So, what word?
Pizza Hut.
I was going to say oranges. What were you going to say?
I said Pizza Hut roof.
Okay, Pizza Hut roof. So if you at FAF with Pizza Hut roof, or you message me and say oranges, I will then post that, and we know that you're listening. I feel like you know what I feel like? I feel like you know the Star Wars. I'm memeing everything with you now. I feel like Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. RIBA Future Architects, you're my only hope. Come on, send us the oranges and the Pizza Hut roof. But look, I think that we touched upon your other point of accountability for exploitative work environments, and that's the bit I'm quite passionate about. So what I'll do is I'm gonna cherish employers that I feel are doing it right. You have my commitment on that because it's kind of in line with my goals. But yeah, RIBA should hold them accountable. I'll do my thing. Hopefully they'll do your thing. The other points here, I think maybe we can touch upon it another time because otherwise I like to talk a lot, but right now we're like Lord of the Rings 1. I want to keep it short and sweet for everyone, and we've had a fun tone. But you address your greater transparency in all of RIBA's budget.
Yep.
Fair enough, really, isn't there? Establish a more representative governing body. Yeah. And I think that's more of a talking point directly with RIBA, but I think it makes sense. So for anyone that's kind of got to this point, well done. And sorry, I've been in a talking mood today, guys, and I've quite enjoyed having a chat with Charlie. But I just to remind everyone, you can find FAF on Instagram. I'm going to post the link to FAF. I quite enjoy saying FAF.
It's good branding.
It's so good, isn't it? I'm going to post the open letter on this podcast. I'm going to try and get that out this weekend because I think it will be fun to have it ready for everyone at RIBA for Monday morning.
By the time people read it, we might have come close to 1,000 signatures.
Yeah, how cool would that be? Yeah. We'll get that out. But for, I was going to say, do you have any questions for me, Charlie? And flip the chat around a bit.
I think not so much of a question, but it's very sort of reaffirming to see that people in other sectors of the architecture industry are aware of these issues and sort of sympathetic to it because especially when you're a student or when you're an architectural assistant, sometimes it does appear very much as if we're kind of left out to dry. So it's the whole motive of the sort of group FAF itself is to kind of foster that sort of solidarity between people. So it's very, very reaffirming to sort of get that from not just other people who are architectural assistants, but from people who are in other sort of sectors of the umbrella of architecture as well.
Yeah, of course. And look, my pleasure. I mean, where it's close to home is that I'm a part two.
Yeah,
that's not got in a conventional way. And I do think that you're right. There is this like part two hole you can fall into. And what I do think, and what's been quite refreshing about this, is that I actually do agree with a lot of the things here. And I have seen it from the employer's end of the scale where sometimes good intentions, there are good intentions there. Sometimes it can get lost. I do feel like a lot of architectural practices are doing it the right way. But what is clear from this is that I think we need to champion the ones that are doing it right, because I think that will lead change, because slowly the less attention practices which have bad practices, right? That it's gonna. The fact that the good companies are getting the spotlight, they'll get all the amazing people really interested in the bright, young, passionate, diverse, inclusive students, and they'll have a plethora of skill sets that are dying to work at them because they're a nice place to work. So it kind of solves the problem. And then, then you can imagine, like, remember Parallel Universe, Charlie's architecture practice, and then, at the end of the conversation, like, you're like, Steve, no one's applying to me anymore. And I'll be like, well, yeah, Charlie, you bloody worked everyone into the grave, mate. No one wants... And your reputation precedes you. And that's what I think is really important for employers to remember, is that your reputation is worth its weight in gold. And when you're interviewing people, you have to treat them with respect. When they're employed there, sometimes things don't go the right way because it's life, but you need to constantly... speak to employees, ask their feedback, say, look, sorry that this happened with a deadline. We're going to try and work things out. We're going to try and do this. You need to kind of bring people into the process. But like a good example is JTP, right? The amount of awards they've won for being good employers is amazing. So John Thompson and Partners.
Okay.
I've worked with them on recruitment. They are really good. No one ever leaves there.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Richard Rogers, right? I have a joke sometimes that the only people that leave Richard Rogers' practices is when they either quit architecture or they die because it's a good place to work. They enjoy the design, and you're not worked into the grave early, and people love it. So I never ever see in my professional career, Charlie, a CV from Richard Rogers.
They have that green carpet as well. I bet that makes a big difference.
There you go. Right, we need the green carpet. I think they were a great idea. Thank you so much, Charlie. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And we will put the links for that. And just before we go, anyone listening to find you, where should they find you?
Yeah, so the group is fa.front on Instagram, and my personal account is Charlie_Edmo, EDMO.
Amazing. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been the Architecture Social. And now, Charlie, I'm going to end the chat. Don't go out because I've had another guest cut the call off and I've got to upload the podcast. So thank you so much, mate. Stay here and we'll see everyone next time.
Great.